Now, joining us on the conversation to discuss more on the Ghana elections holding tomorrow, we have Adetunji Omotola, Global Affairs Analyst, and we also have Odelia Ntiamoah Boampong, Global Director, Oxford Africa Women Leadership Institute in Ghana. Thank you so much for joining us on the conversation.
Welcome.
All right, so let me begin with Adetunji. Now, Adetunji, looking at the elections at the moment, let's begin with the candidates and also their platforms. Now, with 13 presidential candidates in the race, how do you assess the political platforms or policy platforms of, first of all, Mahamudu Bawumia from the NPP and John Dramani Mahama from the NDC?
Okay. Look, I think, first of all, it's going to be very difficult for Mahamudu Bawumia. Yes, he's Mr. Digitalization. He's very passionate about using digital, expanding the digital economy. But for the last 8 years, he's been a co-partner with President Nana Akufo-Addo in supervising an economy that has been battered into submission. If you recall, there was a cost of living crisis protest in Ghana, the first of its kind. In fact, we haven't seen such protests in Ghana since the advent of democracy. So it's very difficult. It's almost a similar situation like what Kamala Harris faced in relation to Joe Biden. How does Bawumia, remove himself from the legacy of Akufo-Addo? Now, with regards to John Mahama, of course, he's a known quantity. He's been vice president before, and he was president after his boss, John Evans Atta Mills, passed away. And he then went on to win an election, and he was there for 4 years before he was dislodged by the current president. He's talking about, he's first talking about his previous record of having put together a lot of infrastructure in Ghana, but he's also talking about making Ghana a 24 hours economy, although that's been very difficult for him to explain because in Ghana, not a lot of businesses are open 24 hours. But I think he's got an advantage because of the woes that have been created by the NPP government led by President Nana Akufo-Addo. So those are the clear differences between the two. But there are other candidates as well who are looking attractive, especially the young Nana Bediako, who is a very young chap, and he's coming up with some very fancy and new ideas around the economy. But it's the evidence of the precedent in Ghana is that the smaller parties or the other candidates who belong to the smaller parties combined tend not to get more than 4 or 5% of the total votes cast. So it's really a battle between the two gladiators, Bawumia and John Dramani Mahama, the former president.
Okay, now let's hear from Odelia. What sets these two candidates, I'm talking about a candidate from the NPP and the NDC, apart, in terms of addressing key national issues like economic recovery and also infrastructure?
Well, for the two candidates, I think that they have been battling neck to neck in their various campaigns. Of course, incumbency always gives the incumbent the opportunity to really advertise and also show a lot of what they have been doing. And so that is what has been going on with a lot of commissioning of projects. So far, almost every single day, a new project is commissioned to show exactly what the previous government has done. I'm a bit skeptical about how this is really going to go down for the electorate who are going to be voting, because usually when it's getting close to elections like this, and the incumbent is in a rush to show what they have so far done to the electorates, it usually does not bode well for them. And I can give a typical example of what President Kufuor did in 2008, when there was a lot of show of projects that had been commissioned very late to really prove to electorates that the government was such a performing government. And so that is one of the things that you will have people talk about today. And people are basically indicating that this is not a good idea in this last minute when people are really looking at how the economy should have gone, especially when Bawumia was touted as an economist for the whole 8-year period. It looks like Ghana's economy has backtracked in one of the worst times as compared to previous governments. For example,
Odelia would actually speak more on the economy. We will be speaking more on the economy of
governments. And then, of course, when it comes to John Dramani Mahama, like my previous panelist talked about, he has had a taste of government before. So there's some level of voter apathy to basically say that, well, you've had a chance previously, and we are expecting that you could have put in a lot more than you did, and therefore a couple of people are also not very satisfied with John Dramani Mahama. So the expectation is a bit mixed for the election day, and we are expecting that people should be able to come out in their numbers to vote. But
Odelia, if you can hear me, we will definitely speak more on the economy. But I'm actually told that we have our third guest, and that's Romeo Amponsah-Aduakye, and he joins us. He's a political analyst from Kumasi, Ghana, and he joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us, Romeo.
Thank you very much.
All right, Romeo. Now speaking of other candidates. Now, Alan John Kwadwo Kyerematen's decision to run as an independent candidate has actually created some waves. How does he plan to differentiate himself, from the major political parties?
Thank you very much, and then good evening to your viewers. Mr. John Kwadwo Kyerematen was an integral member of this ruling party. He was the Minister of Trade and Industry from the time the current president took office up to last year when he decided to leave the party and then form his own movement for change. Mr. Alan Kyerematen, it will be very difficult for him to disassociate himself from the successes and the failures of this current administration, because he was a cabinet member and he was an integral member who wanted to run on the ticket of the NPP. So when he decides to take himself out of the challenges and then the problems facing this current administration, people tend not to take him very serious, because somebody who had the ambition of running on the ticket of a party will now claim that they are not credible, will now claim that they are afraid of the people of Ghana. Ghanaians are watching Mr. Alan Kwadwo Kyerematen with double eyes, because what if he had won the race to represent the New Perspective Party instead of the current flag bearer, Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia? He has his own agenda, he has his own plan, but he can never disassociate himself from the ruling party. If he were to be successful, he would have said he contributed to that success. If Ghanaians are criticizing the current government, Mr. Alan Kyerematen cannot be taken out of this.
Okay. Now, thank you so much for that. Now, but with the current, political environment, where both the NNPP and the NDC have actually faced criticism for economic management, and Odelia did say, something, she just touched on it a bit earlier. Which party or candidate appears to be better positioned to address Ghana's inflation and also currency instability?
The flag bearer of the NDC has been president before. He was fortunate to become the president in the middle of 2012. Then he won the elections in that year and then had his first share of the presidency. Ghanaians are asking him questions about what did he do when he was power. He had the opportunity to put the country in a very good shape, but he failed, and he lost woefully in the 2016 general election. Likewise, the candidate of the New Perspective Party, Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia, who was touted by the current president, Anado, to be the economic messiah who has all the keys to the economic problems of the nation Ghana. But looking at him currently, he's more into digitalization instead of solving the economic challenges of the country. So Ghanaians are torn apart between him and the ex-president John Mahama, who should be handling the economy, who is the right person to put Ghana back on track. So President Mahama did his best, but you see, under his reign, we complain a lot about inflation and the economic hardship, depreciation of the Ghanaian cedi as against international currency. Likewise with the current vice president, who is supposed to be the economic management team chairman. He's supposed to run the affairs of Ghana in the economic front. But he's currently come to Ghana, Ghanaians are complaining about how the economy was run. Because the president said he has gotten somebody who knows economics. You shouldn't forget, the current vice president, who is the flag bearer of the New Patriotic Party, was a deputy governor of Bank of Ghana. So he was called upon by Nanado to assist him in running for the presidency in Ghana. So Ghanaians still ask themselves that between the former president and then the current vice president, who is the better candidate when it comes to economy? We shouldn't forget that Mr. Mahama is not an economist. Mr. Mahama is a historian and then a communicator. But for Dr. Bawumia, he is an economist by profession, and Ghanaians were expecting to see a lot of differences, looking at how he ran down President Mahama, how he asked them 91 questions, how he touted the vice president, the late Emisa as being incompetent, likewise the former president being incompetent. So now Ghanaians are asking themselves, the economic measure could not solve the economic hardship of the Ghanaian people. Likewise, when President Mahama was president in 2012 to 2016, he could not also run Ghana through the economic promises they gave to the people of Ghana. So now when we take the economy into perspective, Ghanaians are not so much convinced between the candidates. But since 1992, it is either the NPP and then the NDC. So between these two, definitely one of them will be elected president of Ghana come December 7th.
Oh, okay. Now let's speak to Olatunji now. Olatunji, now when it comes to the electoral process and also voting, can you describe to us what the key differences between the 2024 presidential and parliamentary elections are, and also how will the simple plurality electoral system affect the results?
Look, I think first of all, you see, the parliamentary elections are totally a different ball game. Because the presidential is really the big one, and there tends to be a bandwagon effect. So when you look at this election, I think the critical factor is the fact that this government, for 8 years, has not been able to deliver on the promises they made to Ghanaians, and the fact that also there's serious allegations of corruption, and that is why it looks likely that the former president will win this election. Of course, in the parliamentary elections, these are individuals that are going to put themselves, their record. And many of them, in fact, if you look at the position in parliament, there's almost a 50-50 participation by NDC and MPP. So it's going to be close in terms of the parliamentary elections. It's also going to be close in terms of the presidential elections. But I think the NDC, especially with John Mahama pivoting around resetting the economy, there's a major opportunity here for the NDC to even have the majority in parliament as well, which they don't have currently. So that's the real joker in this election.
Okay. Now, Odelia, the Electoral Commission has actually set a voter threshold, of 749 per polling station. How do you anticipate this will affect the speed and efficiency of the voting process on election day?
Commissioner has, and of course the Electoral Commission has been making a couple of decisions which currently have not sat well with a couple of people. For example, there was going to be a cap on the number of journalists that are supposed to be reporting in this elections, and that was actually shut down even before the whole thing was exposed. Our expectation is that the speedy nature of the elections will be will happen because there is a lot of expectation in this election that is coming up. And so the expectation is that the voting should be done with the speed and the opportunity given to every voter to vote. We have over 40,000 polling stations that are supposed to be a part of the elections. And the expectation is that all these polling stations should be working very well. The expectation also is that the ballot papers should arrive on time. The ballot papers should have the required numbers that people are expected at the various polling stations, and therefore all of those numbers should be updated. The general public is expecting that all these things should be in place so that there is no mayhem at any polling station. And so I'm very sure that the Electoral Commission is really apt and is really ready for the elections, because this is going to be a very heated one. And you remember that on a consistent basis in recent times, we have quickly run to the courts to talk about the elections and pink sheet issues and the fact that voting and counting was not done in the most appropriate ways. And so this commissioner will also, looking at what has happened in the past, would not want this repeated. And therefore, I know that they are putting in a lot of systems to make sure that we do not go back to going to court for counting or for results that are not quite accurate.
Okay. Thank you, Odelia, for that. Now let's move to Romeo. Okay, well, Romeo will be joining us in a bit. We'll try to reconnect with him. Now, Olatunji, with 55.1% of the electorate, being under 35 years old, how important is the youth vote in shaping the 2024 election outcome?
Yes, look, the youth are a critical cohort in this election. And obviously, the issue of jobs is a very big issue for the youth. And the current government, under this current government, the youths have come out to protest. As we saw in Kenya as well, it was the youth that drove the protests in Kenya. And that is why the candidacy of a young man in the mold of Mr. Bediako, it could be a disruptive one. Not that it's going to win the election, but it could be that his candidacy might throw a spanner in the works and force a second round, because you're going to be able to win 50+1% to be able to win the elections in the first round. So the youth of Ghana will be a major factor in this election. And the two candidates are, well, the younger candidate of the two is Bawumia. I think he's about 61 or so. But those guys are still not young, so they don't really represent the youth. But it's going to be interesting how the youths put their signature on this election. We're waiting to see what that would be.
Okay. Now, Odelia, aside the youth, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
All right. Now, aside the
yes,
youth,
I can.
Right, there are 628 male candidates and only 119 female candidates for parliament. Right? What does this gender disparity mean for gender equality in Ghana's political landscape? If you could tell us.
Well, I think that in this coming elections, we may have dwindling numbers in Parliament. We currently have close to 15% representation in Parliament. Very, very likely that we may even go further down. And so there's been a lot of work that has been done by various organizations, including ours, to have gender conversations at various levels. We are going to have a women's situation room to really monitor and project women candidates and make sure that they actually really get the votes and counts that they are supposed to be getting. There's been a lot of work that is being done by women advocacy organizations. The passage of the Affirmative Action Bill, even though belated, is one of the things that really also has come to ginger the whole conversation of gender representation in the elections. It may not necessarily have that ripple effect because it was quite belated, but it just shows that in the coming years, this becomes like some documentation that then goes to buttress the point that political parties would need to do a bit more. I just wanted to add a little bit when it comes to the youth representation in the elections that my brother was also talking about. Remember that the youth representation is not currently a very it's a very big issue, but the Nabediako, like many of the candidates, has not been able to put a very impressive message out there to really get the youth to rally around him. And in recent times, his campaigns have also not been very rigorous. And so the youth really expected a lot from him. Yeah. But as it stands currently, it is actually not, he's not lived up to expectation when it comes to what he is expected to do when he wins an election. Yes, it's very likely that there would be a bit of an upset in certain places, but as it stands currently, I am not too sure he will really cause a major upset in the elections because everybody seems to be talking about messaging. And then remember also that the free SHS actually did not make a lot of impact in the previous elections. The expectation was that when people have reached a voting age, they have benefited from free SHS for the past 7 years, it should have reflected in the votes. That also.
Okay, we'll try to reconnect with Odelia, talking about how it was actually meant to be a three-horse race with one of the candidates representing the youth, but he hasn't done so well so far. So it's actually a two-horse race now. But then let's come back to you, Adetunji, if you can hear me. Still talking about social issues like gender inequality, and poverty. It actually still remains significant in Ghana. Now, the Affirmative Action Act mandates that 30% gender quota for future elections should actually be. But do you actually think that, this will influence political parties' strategies and also candidates' elections, in subsequent electoral cycles?
Absolutely. Look, I think anytime you have this kind of quota, it does help. I mean, South Africa is a very good example where you have a 50-50 policy with the ruling party, the African National Congress. I think the challenge, though, in Africa is that even where you have the quota, the business of contesting for elections is very rigorous and it takes a lot of resources. And a lot of ladies do not have those kind of resources, and many cannot go through the rigor of being on the road and all of that. So it's a challenge, but I think it's welcome. And I think parties, because the voters, I mean, when you look at the voting population, the women are generally typically about just slightly over 50% of the number. So that should also dovetail. So the positions, the elected positions, should also dovetail with the voters' demographics. But as I said earlier, it's not easy for ladies, especially in Africa, to contest elections. They don't get a lot of support. Well, they don't get support.
Okay. All right. Now, earlier, Odelia did talk about how in previous elections, they've actually run to court to complain about having a free, fair, and credible election. Now, there have actually been increasing concerns around electoral fraud and transparency in some parts, of the world, even in Nigeria. Since I'm speaking to you, you're in Nigeria here. Now, how do you think how can Ghanaians, be assured that the 2024 elections will be free, fair, and credible? And also, okay, before we get to that, just let's stop here first.
Okay, look, I think the previous election, there was I think there were 5 people that were killed in 2020. So, of course, normally Ghanaian elections are peaceful, credible, free and fair. But when it's a high-stakes election like this, which it is, then you will find that sometimes hanky-panky can exist. I mean, it's 18 million voters. That's a lot of people. So you'll expect that there will be some irregularities. Even in Namibia, where they just elected their first president, female president, there are irregularities, and the opposition is not happy. They're not happy with the result, and they've declared the winner, the lady who's won, Pandalani, I think her name is. I'm not sure what her name is now, but she won 57% of the vote.
Yeah.
In Mozambique, you can see the protests in Mozambique. After a month, about 72 people have died. The opposition leader is outside the country. It's called for more protests. And that's because the Electoral Commission declared 70%, the results, 70% for the winner. So long as the Electoral Commission of Ghana follows all the processes that are meant to be done, make sure that they collect the results, make sure that people are able to vote, make sure that there is no, if you like, unfairness or bias towards any party. I believe that, Ghanaians will accept the results. And I think it's important also for the opposition not to cry foul, because that's what always causes a lot of conflict. So if the results are contested or disputed, of course, there's a process you have to go to court. But sometimes people feel that in Africa, even when you go to court, the judiciary, sometimes they play to the script of the ruling party. But I believe it's not going to be a major issue like what we're seeing in Mozambique. But, well, we'll see what happens. It's on Saturday.
Oh, well, we'll see how it goes. Now, but, still talking about, free, fair, and credible election, there's been a recorded number of 708,280, first-time voters. Now, what role do you think that this high number of first-time voters, what role do you think it will play?
Look, it's a very significant number. That's probably almost about 5% of the total voting tally. I think it will be interesting because when people are voting for the first time, they are excited about the process and they want to make their, they want to make their choices on the basis of an informed opinion. So I think it's going to be interesting. But remember, those new voters will be spread across the country. They're not going to be in one constituency where you can say, okay, you can target them with a specific message. For example, the cocoa farmers who are saying that if the government gives us fertilizer, then we'll vote for the ruling party. So that's a more significant block with a clearer agenda as to what they want. But when you have over 700,000 voters and they're spread over the country, it's difficult to be able to target them. But of course, they will still be able to make an impact, but it's not going to be as major because they're dispersed and diverse.
Interesting. All right, now, Adetunji will take a quick break, and when we come back at the show, the conversation will still continue. Do stay with us. Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us on the conversation. So we're still discussing Ghana elections, presidential and parliamentary elections set to hold tomorrow, 7th December 2024. and we've been having discussions with Adetunji Omotola, Odelia Boampong, and Romeo Amponsah-Aduakye. But then Odelia and Romeo will be joining us a bit later. So we only have Adetunji for now. Now, Adetunji, just before the break, now we were having this discussion. Now, I think we should go back to talk about, solutions when it comes to Ghanaian economy, which is very, very similar with, what we're facing here in Nigeria. Now, with Ghana grappling with high inflation, a devaluing cedi, and also the mounting debt, what practical economic policies do the presidential candidates propose in order to stabilize the currency and also restore investor confidence?
Well, look, I think for Mahama, presidential candidate, former President Mahama, he's been very clear that he's going to ensure that 24 hours, he says he's going to reset the economy, 24 hours economy, so there wouldn't be any, most economies work, people work 8 hours a day. So he wants to expand that so that the economy is able to create more jobs. And also, obviously, he wants to invest in a smaller government. I think this current government, they have about 110 ministers. So it's a very big government. I don't think there's any country in the world that has more ministers than Ghana, 110, for a country of about 32 million people, compared with Nigeria with about 220 million people, with about 50 ministers, and the United States with about 330 million people with 12 ministers. So there has to be a reduction on the cost of governance. But I think a critical factor for Ghana is that the debt, which is sitting about $50 billion now, and they've got to service that debt. That's what has been affecting the government, and they had to even go and borrow $3 billion from the IMF to be able to pay salaries and all of that. So it's a small economy. Ghana is not a South Africa or Egypt or even Nigeria in terms of scale, in terms of the push and pull factors. They don't really have a large diaspora that remits billions and billions of dollars like Philippines or Nigeria or China or India. So it's going to be a very tight corner for whoever wins this election because of the high debt, high inflation, and also Ghana's economy has not been diversified in the last 60 years. They still rely heavily on cocoa and gold. And as you know, cocoa is not a finished product. It's a product that goes into chocolate. So even though Ghana also now makes chocolate, but the chocolate is not, you're not going to find them on shelves around Abuja or Lagos or Johannesburg or Kinshasa, as you would find other chocolate products that we know, like your Mars and all of that. So it's a very difficult time for Ghana, as it is for many African nations that rely too much on raw materials, import too much, and export, they don't value add the exports. So this is a conundrum for Ghana. But again, Ghana is a country that has a lot of goodwill. A lot of people do visit Ghana, especially the Americans. Also, even South Africa, there's a free passage for Ghanaians and South Africans. South Africans can visit Ghana without visa. Ghanaians can visit South Africa without a visa. So I believe that will help in some way, shape, or form to improve access to markets. But for now, I think all the candidates can do is make promises. Until they get there, one cannot really say whether they will be able to create the change that is necessary. So it's a real tough one for Ghana, and even for those who want to enter the office of president.
Of course. But what about youth unemployment, which is at an alarming rate of 14%? Inflation has actually significantly impacted the cost of living as well. What specific job creation strategies, should that's the candidates be proposing? And would you actually say that, all these challenges being faced in Ghana have actually influenced voter sentiment in some way?
Yes, absolutely. But like the youths of 21st century, any government that focuses on youth, I'm sure you remember a few days ago, President Tinubu in South Africa, in Cape Town, talked about the youth dividend, but then you got to take care of you got to prioritize them, because the youths are restive. If they can't get anything to do, then they will be easy prey for those who want to foist violence or conflict. But I think a country like Ghana, there are opportunities for young people to be able to go in things like technology, agriculture. People must eat every day, whether you're happy or you're sad, you must eat every day. And in fact, there are certain products that are made in Ghana that I've always wondered why Ghanaians have not been able to take full advantage of those products to export them into the global market. Things like the shito. Shito is a spicy pepper sauce that goes with practically every dish that you can think of. And unfortunately, when you see it outside Ghana, the packaging leaves much to be desired. And there are many other products that they have, like a shea butter, that is also very good quality. But again, you don't find them, in numbers on shelves around the world. Okay. So if Ghana really wants to help the youths, they've got to really, in fact, I was talking to somebody this morning at a dental care, and she's 20, and I said, look, while you're still young, you can do more than one job. There's no law that says that you have to do one job. So young people, they can still they can work weekends, they can work evenings, after hours, because sometimes your salary as a young person, because you're just starting out, is never really enough for you to live on. So if you were to use the model that they apply in Europe or in America, people then go and do an extra job, evenings and weekends. And it could be a job that has nothing to do with what you do 9 to 5, or retrain yourself. So if you can't get a job in a particular area, let's say you're a lawyer, you can't get a job as a lawyer, you can train as maybe a plumber, for example, because people are always looking for plumbers, they're always looking for electricians, they're always looking for artisans, people who have skills. As you know, in Europe, a lot of people do those jobs and they make a lot of money. Even bus drivers make a lot of money in Europe. So it's an opportunity for young people not to only rely on the academic qualifications that they have, because there's only so much that so many jobs out there. So they can try other skills, gain other skill sets, move to another town, work on sociable hours. But I think the young people are the ones that need to be focused on and really helped to move into employment very quickly, because otherwise it creates problems for the government and the country.
All right. Now, I'm told that Romeo has reconnected with us. So Romeo, if you can hear me, welcome back. You've actually missed out on a lot, but we still have some time for you. Now, let's talk about other economic challenges faced in Ghana, other issues or key issues that were identified by Ghanaians for the 2024 election on infrastructure, healthcare, and education. Now, to begin with, healthcare. What role does it play in this election, and how are the political parties, planning to improve healthcare access and quality for Ghanaians, especially those in rural areas?
When the world was hit with COVID-19, now President Alan John Kwadwo Kyerematen promised the people of Ghana that he's going to build 111 hospitals, mostly in the rural part of our nation, Ghana. And as of now, we are yet to complete majority of these hospitals. When it comes to Ghana, majority of our first-class hospitals, teaching hospitals, are centered in the regional capitals. We have the Kolebu Teaching Hospital, we have the Complex Teaching Hospital, and then the Tamale Teaching Hospital. So majority of cases are rushed to these teaching hospitals instead of the normal towns and then the villages. Now, healthcare is going to play a major role in this election, because Ghanaians are of the opinion that when our leaders, our political leaders, fall sick,
they rush out of the country for healthcare. So why don't they invest a lot into our healthcare situation so that when they fall sick, they can be treated here in Ghana? Quite recently, the vice president, who is running the ticket of the New Patriotic Party, declared that they are going to give free dialysis to Ghanaians who are fighting with kidney issues. They started with about 20 hospitals in the nation. So a lot of people have lost their lives. A lot of pregnant women have lost their lives when they have been transported from the rural areas to whether a clinic or a chief compound or a hospital somewhere in the district capital. So all these things will come into play in tomorrow's election because health is your worth. And the Ghanaians are so much interested in that. Ghanaians can mention about the University of Ghana Medical Center. They can mention about Kolebu, as I said earlier on, but they need the hospital to be closer to them so that when they are sick, they don't need to take about 1 or 2 cars to the nearest hospital for treatment. And then when these hospitals are also built, they should be equipped with modern day equipment so that when they are sent there, they'll be comfortable and then they'll be rest assured in the health professional that whatever is bothering them, whatever health issue they are facing, they will be cared for. So health will play a major role in the December 7th election.
Okay. Now, Odelia, I'm told you've been able to reconnect as well. Talk to us, despite a reduction in the inflation rate, since its peak in 2022, the cost of living remains a major issue for Ghanaians. You're in Ghana, so you can actually attest to that. So what specific policies should be implemented to not only control inflation, but also to address the daily challenges that ordinary citizens face in terms of rising prices?
Our expectation really is that whoever wins the elections would really hold things like inflation in check, will be able to deal with domestic revenue, which is then the key way to spend. So ramping up the domestic revenue is going to be a very important place for whoever is coming in. Then also the issue of taxes has been mentioned majorly as one of the areas that these political parties are expecting to reduce when it comes to ease of doing business in Ghana is concerned. And so taxes will have to be something that has to be really looked at. Then, of course, when it also comes to within the tax space, widening the tax net has always been a key conversation. And my expectation is that through the Registrar General, through the current various forms of digitization, we should be able to do more when it comes to ramping up the numbers in the informal sector to be able to get everyone within the tax bracket. Globally and even on the continent, Ghana is one of the countries with the lowest tax revenue on the continent and beyond. And therefore, we will need to really work very hard within this space to ramp up the numbers for domestic revenue. Remember that we have borrowed so much externally and have missed a lot of payment deadlines. We've not been able to really show the rest of the world that we are capable of paying our debts. And therefore, our hard work within our domestic sphere is what has to be really worked upon to be able to get us to get up and to be able to even have some spending amounts. It also means that some projects that were put in place, like the free SHS, is a place where almost all the two political parties have been using it to convince especially the youth and many other parents who have benefited that is going to really still be in the same shape and form. But I think that realistically, it is one of the places where we have spent so much money as a nation that we would really need to sit down and re-strategize and rethink it and let people who can afford pay so that we have some sort of a stratified system where those who can afford are able to pay some money, and those who cannot afford, we really identify those people to be able to support. So these are a few things within the Ghanaian economy that we would need to be able to work on to put inflation in check, to be able to ramp up revenue when it comes to spending. One of the key areas that was actually going to arrest and help food inflation was the Planting for Food and Jobs program, which kicked off very nicely, and I'm not too sure where it stands currently. But food inflation is also one of the places that we need to be able to target very well to be able to bring the inflationary figures down. So these are my thoughts.
Okay. Now, just before we wrap up, Adetunji, let's hear from you. With Ghana's finances severely depleted by the end of 2022, this actually led to a need for an IMF bailout. Many are concerned about, the long-term consequences or implications of relying on external financial assistance. What reforms should be considered to prevent the recurrence of such a fiscal crisis? And Odelia did speak a bit about it as well. So.
Yes, look, I've always said, I've lived in Ghana before 2008. I moved to Ghana from South Africa to go and sell wine in Ghana. Ghana was pumping. I think the growth, the GDP growth in Ghana then was about 14%. And then Ghana got out of the heavily indebted poor country under President John Kufuor. In fact, they discovered oil as well, and in reasonable quantities. And we thought that with the discovery of oil, that Ghana would be out of the quagmire that many African countries face. They will learn from Nigeria as well how not to use oil money. But unfortunately, President Nana Dankwa Akufo-Addo then came to power, and he appointed 110 ministers into government. And that's never happened before in the history of Africa. So I suspect that what Ghana can do, because it's got a very good image around the world, apart from borrowing money, they need to aggressively market and export and value add made in Ghana products. Ghanaians, as I said earlier, can now come into South Africa without a visa. Nigerians can't do that. So it's an advantage for Ghanaians who are coming here, not just to come for a holiday and to enjoy the beauty of South Africa, but they need to bring in products that are made in Ghana. Look, when you go to even a Nigerian restaurant, some Nigerian restaurants here in Johannesburg, is the Nkulenu, the palm wine from Ghana that you will find there. You won't even find Nigerian palm wine in a Nigerian restaurant. So there's a lot to be said for exports. There's a lot to be said for diversification. And there's a lot to be said for Ghana's, if you like, soft power. Ghana needs to use its soft power the same way that Nigeria is using its soft power in music and the arts and Nollywood. So we want to see more Ghanaian culture being exported around the world. There's a lot to be said for that.
Absolutely, Adetunji. Well, you've all spoken, very, very well. Thank you so much, Adetunji Omotola, Global Affairs Analyst. Odelia Ntiamoah Boampong, Global Director, Oxford Africa Women Leadership Institute from Ghana, and also Romeo Amponsah-Aduakye, Political Analyst in Kumasi, Ghana. We appreciate you, gentlemen and lady, for joining us on the conversation.
Welcome.
And with that, we've come to the end of the show. Thank you so much for staying tuned. I am Dashen Usman. Have a wonderful evening.